Here we go for Bitcoin, starting off with the 5-day chart over here. This is the chart that's essentially been telling us to be bearish on this channel for the past couple of months, going in back to that 1st of April move over here where momentum started to pivot to the downside. And I wanted to go back and analysize this now that we have pretty much the move here. And in this case, again, I'll just briefly go over this. 5-day BBWP was essentially driving this analysis. The 5-day BBWP, or BBWP in general, is just a volatility measurement in a statistical format, and it is a measurement of the dispersion of returns. And anytime that we have seen it down around the teens, or especially lower, the expansion phase from that on average has led to about a 45% move, give or take, over the next about 40 days on average. And to measure that up with the last 6 iterations, this being our 7th, started in, again, early April, I would say, it's very much consistent with that, actually. We can see that this move has played out about 47% to the downside, which, you know, we do expect that to be on the upper end of that estimate, or of that average, a lot more similar to what we saw back and over here in, of course, May of last year, actually, where we got somewhat similar activity, you know, low volatility period for about a month and a half on the 5-day, and then big expansion phase. We're getting the same thing over here as well, obviously. And in this case, the 5-day stochastic momentum was also, of course, angling to the downside. So that is why we were looking at that as likely to resolve to the downside. There was hoping before that, but as soon as this turned down and rejected the bullish controls, and it also rejected this regression trend line here, that was, you know, heavy downside pressure, obviously. So in this case, I do think that this move for now, this particular move that we're on, is more or less over. I think that the low is in for now, but the low I do not believe is in for forever. At least I would not say that is likely, based off of a few other things. I do think that this can still roll over time and maybe give a try somewhere down around our current lows, or maybe a little bit lower than that. But until then, Bitcoin does have free reign to kind of bounce around over these next few weeks, I imagine. And I would be looking at the 5-day stochastic momentum as still a major pivot for the higher term timeframes, meaning that as long as Bitcoin is fulfilling this condition, which on the current period is 36,500, there is still downside pressure, and Bitcoin on the higher term time frame is more or less range bound, you know, which can still imply some upside movement. But ultimately, you know, we played out this move basically as I'm not going to say as you would expect, because I fucking hate that, or what is it, like exactly as predicted. Like, you can't, in my experience, in my opinion, you cannot predict anything. What you can do is you can look at statistics and probabilities, nothing else, nothing more. If you start to like call moves and bullshit like that, I think that that's honestly impossible to do. But in this case, you know, again, very consistent with the past iterations of this in the past couple of years here. Again, we could do this even more, but in this case, just nice and easy to see on the same screen. So about 40 days, 47%. Again, you know, I do think it's possible to trade a little bit lower, but ultimately, I think that Bitcoin's probably found the lows for now. And if it is going to trade lower, it probably takes until, like, you know, another few weeks, if that. Anyways, on that particular note, I do want to speak about why I'm not convinced that the low is necessarily in just yet, and what I'd essentially use to judge the low being in. Now, one of the things right here, honestly, is the monthly 55. Bitcoin did get a test down around there. Again, we can hang it around there, even get a few wicks lower. That's completely fine. But ultimately, I you know, if this area gets retested, that's completely normal, actually, over the long period of time on a macro chart. But the next big thing that I'm really looking for to kind of confirm a macro low, meaning that I will not be calling any sort of macro lows in until this condition is at minimum present. It must be present for me to call a macro low, or even consider a macro low in, is the monthly accumulation distribution indicator right here. Anytime that we have seen a slope change on this indicator in the extremes, so in the extreme greens over here or the extreme reds over here, those have been macro pivots. I've marked all of these off with these green vertical bars, and you can match them up on the chart, and you can very quickly see that, you know, pretty much all of these were macro shifts in directions, which was rather powerful. Now, of course, as you can see right now, we are still downside angled. So as long as this has a negative slope and is even in the green zone, I would go as far to say that it's unlikely, historically speaking, that we do have the low in. This can obviously correct further down over the next few months, probably into, you know, the later portion of summer, and then give a positive slope, maybe even around this trend line. I don't know if that's actually going to work out like that, although it has been for the past few years here. And if it does something like that, that would be a really good indication. And perhaps that looks something like this, where Bitcoin, you know, initially bounces up, bounces around, maybe retests around those lows, and does something like that. That would be, you know, definitely a possible scenario over here. But ultimately, I would go as far to say that we probably haven't seen the last time Bitcoin below 30,000 bucks. But I do think that, you know, Bitcoin probably, you know, rallies up a little bit more from here and trades at least sideways in the mid to low $30,000 territory. Until then, I would just be aware of this, because until that happens, and I know a lot of people are very interested in this right now, personally speaking, I would not call a macro low in. I'd say that we've certainly done a lot of damage to the downside, absolutely. But there is still risk of retesting those lows and maybe even going a little bit lower than that. Again, based off of yesterday's video, what I kind of think is perhaps the worst case scenarios, we pretty much played out the majority of it already, but maybe a little bit lower, somewhere down around about 21,000 bucks, if that. Anyways, in this case, I do want to get back on over to here. Yes. And talk about why do you think we're kind of likely to see a bounce right here. We have seen global open interest go for the full-on reset now, so I do think that this is very, 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 very important. We're actually even lower, I believe, than what we saw on the last major low in the low $30,000 territory. Yeah, around February. So that was the last, what's it called? The war announcement. They announced the war. So generally speaking, I am looking for this to probably bounce around a little bit. Again, you're going to see a lot of people just blindly buying around 30,000 bucks anyways, because those are around the yearly lows, and it's a nice round psychological even number. On top of that, we do see hourly funding rates are negative, and significantly negative right here. In fact, we saw the most negative rates in a long time yesterday at negative 0.025%. The daily also posting some pretty negative rates for the first time in a while, comparable to what we saw in January, actually, and again in September of last year. Some both pretty nice lows. Obviously, Bitcoin did trade lower over time, but some good pivots ultimately. So that also does kind of suggest that, hey, probably do see a bit of sideways and up from here. But I should let you know that also you can find this data on the Crown Chain application. The dailies are free, and then the hourlies we do have under the premium, so I should let you know that. Anyways, also on the idea of a likely bounce within this region is the macro here, the macro fib that we were looking at on the monthly, I believe it was. Yeah, this is a macro fib from the ultimate high to the ultimate low of our current cycle to our last cycle, and the 618 is right in alignment with that 55 exponential right here. And actually, the 618 got tested pretty much perfectly, I would say. About as perfect as I can expect on a monthly, which we have a low of 25,365.62 on the index, and the 618 was coming in 25,249.08. I mean, that's good enough. It's good enough, at least in my opinion. So that brings up the question of where, or sorry, one last thing on that note. We also do see over here on the daily, one of the big specific conditions for looking, calling the end of this current move and likely looking for, a significant bounce was the daily stochastic momentum, which we have now seen officially cross the upside. I want to see it specifically get above the critical zone now, would be the next sort of thing. But this will remain with upside posturing as long as Bitcoin's above 26,500. So Bitcoin's going to have some pretty big ranges here, even on the short-term timeframes, being that it is incredibly volatile right now. But ultimately, likely to trade sideways and up from here. And if we do go reference daily BBWP, we hit extremes. And we're probably going to max out here for a little bit of time as well. So expect violent swings, but ultimately I would be looking for, maybe a higher low somewhere in the upper 20s, and then probably Bitcoin puts in a rally into the, mid 30s, let's say. But in this case, I would still say that I want to see the moving average get above the BBWP itself. At that point, I would look for the corrective move and kind of govern that by the daily stochastic momentum. Until then, what are the general areas of interest based off of this to the upside? On a bouncy bounce? Well, it's kind of the same thing as before, actually. We have, if I take this off so you can actually see, we have, or if I draw a fib on this from the high to the low of this current move, we have some pretty obvious areas. One of them we're almost at right now, actually about 31,250, the 382. I would be looking for maybe short-term pullbacks around there ultimately. But any sort of a closure above there on a daily, and I would be looking for Bitcoin to pop back up and potentially fill around the gap that we had from last Friday open, from last Friday closure to this week's open on CME. Anywhere between about 33.5 to 35.5 is fair game, and I would be looking for short-term, medium-term pullbacks from there. In fact, if Bitcoin were to spike into there and then trade sideways and then roll over, and maybe, retest around those lows or perhaps have slightly lower lows, that would also be, kind of a way forwards here as well. But I do think that we found a low here for now. Daily Jewel actually is giving off a God mode signal here, which, by the way, the only other time that we've actually even had a God mode signal was in November 2018. for CME specifically. And this is not an immediate bottom signal here, but it is suggesting that we're pretty damn close. You can see in this case over here in 2018, it started to fire that off on the first major low. Bitcoin has a nice big bounce and then rolls over. I think that is possible here. Maybe over a longer period of time. I don't think that this all happens like today or tomorrow or this week, but I'm never, I always want to say that, hey, I don't think that timing analysis is like, or at least I don't think that I can do it that well. I don't really see too many people do it that well, to be honest with you, but fair enough. In this case, though, again, this is all going to be governed by about that 31, let's just call it 31,500 close on CME specifically. See a daily closure above there, I'd be looking for rallies up first somewhere around this region, and then, caution around there. And again, I do have no reason to believe that Bitcoin puts in a greater rally until we do see specifically a daily closure above the 618, which is about 35,550. And that is also very close to the 5-day momentum pivot over here, which again will naturally come down significantly on this next closing period, which is coming in not tonight, but not tomorrow night, but the night after that. Basically, the weekly closure is going to have it. So if we start to see that, then there could be a nice big rally, maybe even towards the low $40,000 territory. So keep in mind that in bear market rallies, which yes, we're still in a fucking bear market, at least at minimum, as long as Bitcoin's below $52,000. They are designed to be some of the most devastating and terrible things. And honestly, looking at the weekly RSI, I don't think I do not believe that we're done just yet. But ultimately, I do think that Bitcoin has a nice low in for now. Anyways, I see that we're 11 minutes and 30 seconds into this video. So I want to now go back into the short-term timeframes and come up with an invalidation for this. So this invalidation would essentially suggest that Bitcoin's rally is canceled immediately, and I'd be looking for a retest around the lows. And that would be with any sort of a 4-hour closure, maybe even an hourly below about $28,000. Until then, yes, low-term time frame ranges are going to be rather wide as Bitcoin is extremely volatile right here, but we've hit extremes twice, basically on all time frames now, under a daily, and now the daily is even maxing up as well. So I would be looking at this as a nice, at least sideways range. And then if Bitcoin does start to close below $28,000, very likely test somewhere around the lows yet again, or probably a little bit lower than that. And that's where I'd really start to be looking for, preps in my, at least for me, maybe some long-term positions. Until then, sideways is the name of the game, and do be aware that there's going to be some pretty violent swings in the short-term timeframes. Bitcoin will naturally have hidden bearish divergence, basically going all the way through, especially like 32.5, but fucking hell, man, even like $36,000. So I would express caution at those regions. Anyways, with that said, I want to, or at least hopefully that was helpful. I forgot to show my Instagram. My Instagram account is in the link description below. Please understand any other account other than that one is a scammer. It is not me. I don't have any secret trading funds that you can jump into. And what else? Bybit. Yep, Bybit. They got a link in there. Go get wrecked there. It's great. No, don't fucking do that. Look, can't have that shit on my conscience, man. But yeah, make sure that you test your strategies. You don't need to risk any sort of financial equity in order to find a working strategy for yourself, and then maybe consider it. Hopefully that was helpful, and there you go for that.